The security guard's radio crackled to a stop mid-sentence as the sound pierced through Mercy General Hospital at exactly 3:47 a.m., a roar so deep, so mournful, it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It wasn't coming from the zoo across town. Rex knew. Somehow, 2,000 miles away in Montana, a 450-pound African lion had sensed the exact moment Dorothy Mae Thompson's heart monitor flatlined in room 314. Nurses dropped their clipboards. A janitor's mop clattered to the floor. In the ICU, Dorothy's grandson Marcus stood frozen, his hand still gripping hers, watching the green line go flat. The old woman's fingers, which had once bottle-fed this same lion as an orphaned cub, grew cold. Her last whispered word wasn't goodbye. It was Rex. How does a wild animal know when love dies? How does loyalty transcend distance, species, even death itself? What happened next would challenge everything we thought we knew about the bonds that make us human. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Dorothy Mae Thompson sat in her wheelchair by the window of Sunset Manor Nursing Home, counting the same Montana snowflakes she'd watched fall for 3 winters running. At 78, her arthritis-gnarled fingers still moved with purpose as she dialed the familiar number, waiting for the voice that made her Tuesdays bearable. Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary, this is Jake speaking. Hello, dear. It's Dorothy. Is my boy having a good day? Jake's voice softened immediately. He'd grown accustomed to these daily calls from the elderly woman who'd donated more money to their sanctuary than anyone in its 30-year history. Rex is doing well, Mrs. Thompson. He's been sitting by the fence again like he's waiting for someone. Dorothy closed her eyes, picturing the magnificent golden beast she'd raised from a 2-month-old cub. 12 years old now, ancient for a lion, Rex had never forgotten the woman who'd bottle-fed him through Montana's harsh winters, who'd sung him lullabies when thunderstorms frightened him, who'd loved him with the fierce devotion of a mother who'd lost her only child. "Tell him Mama's thinking about him," Dorothy whispered, her voice catching slightly. Down the hallway, her grandson Marcus Thompson slammed his law textbook shut in frustration. 28 years old and drowning in student debt, he'd driven 3 hours from Missoula to visit his grandmother, hoping she'd finally see reason about her ridiculous obsession with that lion. His parents had given up trying to talk sense into her years ago, but Marcus needed that inheritance. The $300,000 Dorothy kept threatening to spend on Rex's care could change his life. "Grandma, we need to talk about your will again," Marcus said, entering her room with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to ask instead of demand. Dorothy turned from the window, her blue eyes still sharp despite her frail body. "Marcus, honey, you know Rex needs—" "Rex is an animal, Grandma. A dangerous wild animal that you've somehow convinced yourself is your pet." Marcus pulled up a chair, his voice rising. "Do you know how much good that money could do for actual people? For your actual family?" Helen Richardson, the nursing home administrator, appeared in the doorway with impeccable timing. At 52, Helen had perfected the art of concerned authority, her blonde hair pulled back in a bun that never moved, her smile never quite reaching her calculating green eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Helen said, though her tone suggested she hoped she was. "Dorothy, dear, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your property. The developers are very interested, and the offer stands at $500,000. Think of the good you could do with that money. For Marcus's education, for your own care." Dorothy's jaw tightened. She'd built her small ranch outside Billings with her late husband 40 years ago, back when she'd been Dr. Dorothy Thompson, one of the world's leading wildlife researchers. Before David died, before everything changed. "That land isn't for sale, Helen, and neither is my boy's future," Dr. Sarah Martinez had delivered thousands of diagnoses in her 20-year career, but she'd never had to tell a 78-year-old woman that her heart was failing while her grandson sat in the corner calculating inheritance prospects. The cardiologist's office at Mercy General felt smaller than usual as Dorothy Mae Thompson gripped her worn leather purse, her knuckles white against the brown fabric. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid the tests confirm what we suspected. Your heart failure has progressed to stage 4. With medication and lifestyle changes, we're looking at perhaps 6 months." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his law student instincts kicking in. "What about surgery? Transplant? There have to be options." Dr. Martinez glanced between grandmother and grandson, noting the tension that crackled between them like static electricity. At Dorothy's age, with her medical history, surgery carries extreme risks. "We could discuss it, but no surgery." Dorothy's voice cut through the medical jargon with surprising strength. "I've lived my life, Dr. Martinez. I just need to make sure my affairs are in order." "Grandma, you can't just give up!" Marcus's voice cracked with frustration. "What about Rex? If you die, who's going to take care of your precious lion?" The question hung in the sterile air like a challenge. Dorothy turned to face her grandson, and for a moment Dr. Martinez saw not a frail, elderly patient, but the fierce woman who'd once traveled to the most dangerous corners of Africa to save endangered species. "That's exactly why I can't waste time on surgeries that might not work, honey. Rex needs someone to fight for him when I'm gone." As they left the hospital, Marcus couldn't contain his anger any longer. "This is insane, Grandma. You're talking about dying for a wild animal that doesn't even know you exist half the time." Dorothy stopped walking and turned to face him on the hospital steps, her cane gripping the concrete for support. The Montana wind whipped through her silver hair, and Marcus was startled to see tears in her eyes. "Let me tell you something about Rex, Marcus. I found him when he was barely 8 weeks old, lying next to his dead mother in Kenya. Poachers had killed his entire pride for their pelts and bones. He was starving, covered in flies, almost dead himself." Dorothy's voice grew stronger as the memory took hold. "I spent 3 months nursing him back to health, feeding him every 2 hours with a bottle, keeping him warm during the cold nights. When he had nightmares, yes, lions have nightmares, I would sing to him until he fell back asleep." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but Dorothy wasn't finished. "Your father, David, helped me raise him. David understood what it meant to save something precious, to give everything you have to protect what can't protect itself." Her voice broke slightly. "When David died in that car accident 30 years ago, rushing through a storm to bring me emergency supplies for the cubs I was caring for, Rex became all I had left of my son's compassion." "But Grandma—" "No, Marcus, listen." Dorothy's grip tightened on her cane. "When I brought Rex to Montana, he was broken, traumatized. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't interact with other animals, wouldn't trust anyone but me. It took years of patience, love, and yes, money to help him heal." She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and showed Marcus a video Jake had sent her that morning. Rex was lying in his enclosure, his massive head resting on his paws, staring toward the road that led to town, toward Dorothy. "He's been doing this every day for the past 2 weeks, Marcus. Somehow he knows I'm sick. Animals sense these things in ways we don't understand." Marcus stared at the video, watching the magnificent lion's obvious distress. For the first time, he saw not a dangerous predator, but a creature capable of grief, loyalty, and love. "The sanctuary costs $50,000 a year to maintain his care," Dorothy continued. "The medical bills, the specialized diet, the veterinary care for a geriatric lion. It's expensive. But that money isn't just keeping Rex alive, honey. It's keeping a promise I made to your father." "What promise?" Dorothy looked out across the parking lot toward the mountains where Rex waited. "David's last words to me were, 'Save them all, Mom. Promise me you'll save them all.' He wasn't just talking about the cubs we were caring for that day. He was talking about every creature that needed someone to fight for them when the world gave up." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the wall of resentment he'd built over the years. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it, sweetheart. You saw dollar signs where I saw love. You saw obligation where I saw honor." Dorothy touched his arm gently. "But maybe now, with time running out, you're finally ready to understand what your father died trying to protect." 2 weeks after the diagnosis, Marcus found himself doing something he'd never done before, actually cleaning out his grandmother's room at Sunset Manor instead of just visiting long enough to ask about money. Dorothy had been hospitalized again the night before with chest pains, and Helen Richardson had suggested he might want to organize her belongings while she recovered. Marcus started with the obvious places, the dresser drawers filled with outdated medications and greeting cards from people he'd never heard of. But as he moved Dorothy's ancient jewelry box, he noticed something odd. The bottom drawer of her nightstand was locked, and when he jiggled it, he could hear papers rustling inside. "Where would she keep a key?" he muttered, running his hands along the underside of the drawer. His fingers found a small magnetic box stuck to the back corner, and inside was a tiny brass key that fit perfectly. The drawer was crammed with documents, photographs, and what looked like scientific journals. Marcus pulled out the first item and nearly dropped it. It was a Time magazine from September 1995, the cover featuring a younger version of his grandmother standing next to a pride of lions. The headline read, "The Lion Whisperer, Dr. Dorothy Thompson's Revolutionary Research Saves African Wildlife." "What the hell?" Marcus whispered, staring at the photograph. This wasn't the frail, animal-obsessed grandmother he'd known his entire life. This was a scientist, a professional, someone who'd apparently been famous enough to make the cover of a major magazine. He flipped through the article with growing amazement. Dr. Dorothy Thompson had been one of the world's leading experts on African lion behavior and conservation. She'd published dozens of papers, consulted with governments across Africa, and had been instrumental in establishing several major wildlife preserves. The article mentioned her groundbreaking field research and her unparalleled ability to connect with and understand lion social dynamics. But it was the sidebar that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Tragedy strikes research team. Dr. Thompson's son, David, 16, was killed in a vehicle accident while delivering emergency supplies to his mother's research camp during a severe storm in Kenya. The young man, who had been planning to follow in his mother's footsteps as a wildlife biologist, died when his vehicle skidded off a rain-slicked road." Marcus sank into Dorothy's chair, the magazine trembling in his hands. His father had died trying to help save animals, not because Dorothy had chosen lions over family. The story he'd been told his entire life, that David had died because Dorothy was too obsessed with her work to come home, was wrong. He dug deeper into the drawer, finding research journals filled with Dorothy's neat handwriting, photographs of her with various lions, and what appeared to be genetic charts and breeding records. One folder was labeled Rex, Subject 001, and contained detailed observations of Rex's behavior from his first day at the sanctuary through the previous month. Day 1247. Rex continues to exhibit signs of separation anxiety when unable to hear my voice. Keeper Jake reports that daily phone calls have become essential to Rex's emotional stability. Note, bond appears stronger than typical human-animal attachment observed in previous subjects. Day 2091. Rex's depression following my absence due to pneumonia lasted 6 days. refused food, showed aggressive behavior toward caretakers. Immediate improvement upon hearing recorded message. Recommend continued vocal contact for psychological health. The entries went on for years, each one documenting not just Rex's physical health but his emotional state, his obvious attachment to Dorothy, and her careful observations of their relationship. This wasn't the obsession of a lonely old woman. It was the continued research of a brilliant scientist. Marcus was so absorbed in reading that he didn't hear footsteps in the hallway until Helen Richardson appeared in the doorway. "Oh, Marcus, I didn't expect you to still be here," Helen said, her eyes immediately falling on the scattered documents. "I just came to check if you needed any help sorting through Dorothy's things." Something in Helen's tone made Marcus quickly close the folder he'd been reading. "Just organizing like you suggested. Found some old family photos." Helen stepped closer, and Marcus noticed her eyes were fixed on the Time magazine. "Is that your grandmother? She looks so professional." "Yeah. Apparently she used to work with animals before I was born," Marcus said casually, though his mind was racing. Why was Helen so interested, and why did she seem surprised that Dorothy had been a scientist? "How fascinating," Helen murmured. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding Dorothy's care costs. The nursing home is implementing some new programs that could be quite expensive. It might be worth reconsidering the property sale." "What kind of programs?" Helen's smile was perfectly practiced. "Oh, enhanced medical monitoring, specialized therapies, that sort of thing. For someone in Dorothy's condition, we're looking at perhaps an additional $15,000 per month." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That seems excessive for basic care. "Well, Dorothy does require quite a bit of special attention. Of course, if she were to liquidate some of her assets, we could ensure she receives the absolute best care available." After Helen left, Marcus sat in stunned silence, processing everything he'd discovered. His grandmother wasn't a crazy old woman wasting money on a pet. She was a respected scientist who had built a meaningful relationship with an animal she'd saved. His father hadn't died because Dorothy was irresponsible, but because he'd been trying to help her save endangered wildlife. And now Helen Richardson, who had been pressuring Dorothy to sell her property, was suddenly implementing expensive new care programs that would conveniently drain Dorothy's savings. Marcus picked up his phone and called the hospital. "I need to speak with Dorothy Thompson in room 314. It's urgent." When Dorothy answered, her voice was weak but alert. "Marcus, is everything all right?" "Grandma, I found your research. I found the magazine, the journals, everything." "Why didn't you tell me you were a famous scientist?" There was a long pause before Dorothy spoke. "Because I stopped being a scientist the day your father died, honey. After that, I was just a grieving mother trying to keep a promise." "What promise?" "To love the creatures your father died trying to save." Marcus spent the next 3 days diving deeper into his grandmother's hidden past, and each discovery made him question everything he thought he knew about his family. He'd taken time off from law school, telling his professors he had a family emergency, which was more true than he'd initially realized. The first breakthrough came when he found Dorothy's old contact list buried in another locked drawer. Most of the entries were from the 1990s, but one caught his attention. Dr. William Harrison, National Geographic Society. Marcus decided to take a chance and called the number. "Dr. Harrison speaking." "Dr. Harrison, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm calling about my grandmother, Dorothy Thompson. She used to be a wildlife researcher." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Dorothy Thompson? My God, how is she? I haven't heard from her in decades." She's dying, sir. Heart failure. I was wondering if you could tell me about her work." "I'm just learning about her scientific career." Dr. Harrison's voice became reverent. "Your grandmother was one of the most brilliant animal behaviorists I ever worked with. Her research on lion social structures and human-animal bonding was groundbreaking. She published papers that changed how we understand the emotional complexity of large predators. I found some of her journals about a lion named Rex. Rex? Good Lord, that research was extraordinary. Dorothy documented the first known case of long-term emotional bonding between a human and a wild lion. The scientific community was fascinated, but then Dr. Harrison's voice trailed off. Then my father died. Yes, David, such a tragedy. That boy was as passionate about conservation as his mother. After the accident, Dorothy just disappeared from the academic world, stopped publishing, stopped attending conferences. We all assumed grief had ended her career. Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat. Dr. Harrison, would Dorothy's research have any value today? Scientific value, I mean? Are you kidding? Her work on Rex alone could be worth millions in research grants. The genetic studies she was conducting, the behavioral observations, it was decades ahead of its time. If she's continued documenting Rex's development, that data would be invaluable to modern conservation efforts. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his car outside Sunset Manor, staring at the building with new eyes. His grandmother wasn't just a lonely old woman spending money on a pet. She was a pioneering scientist who had sacrificed her career to honor her dead son's memory. That evening, Marcus drove to Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary. He'd never actually visited Rex, despite years of arguments about the lion's care costs. Jake, the keeper, Dorothy spoke with daily, met him at the entrance. "You're Dorothy's grandson," Jake said, extending a weathered hand. "She talks about you all the time." "How's she doing?" "Not well. That's actually why I'm here. I wanted to see Rex." Jake's expression grew serious. "He's been different lately. More agitated, won't eat regularly. Animals can sense when their people are sick, you know." They walked through the sanctuary, past enclosures housing rescued bears, wolves, and eagles, but nothing prepared Marcus for his first sight of Rex. The lion was massive, easily 4.5 feet tall at the shoulder, with a golden mane that caught the late afternoon sun like spun copper. But it was his eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They were intelligent, alert, and unmistakably sad. "Rex," Jake called softly, "Dorothy's grandson is here to visit." The lion lifted his great head and looked directly at Marcus. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, man and beast studied each other. Then Rex made a sound Marcus had never heard before, a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed almost like speech. "He's trying to communicate," Jake explained. "Dorothy taught him that sound. It means family." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. "How long has he been here?" 12 years. Dorothy brought him when he was just a cub, spent every day with him for the first 3 years, then visited weekly until her health started failing. She still calls every day, though. He knows her voice immediately. "What happens when Dorothy dies?" Jake's face grew grim. "Honestly, Rex is already 12 years old, which is elderly for a lion. In the wild, most lions don't live past 10. The stress of losing Dorothy..." He shrugged helplessly. "We've seen animals die of grief before. And frankly, without Dorothy's financial support, the sanctuary can't afford his specialized care. We'd have to transfer him to a zoo, which would probably kill him faster than grief." That night, Marcus called his parents for the first time in months. His mother, Sarah, answered on the 3rd ring. "Marcus, is everything okay? You never call unless..." "Mom, I need to ask you about Dad and Grandma Dorothy. The real story." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I found Grandma's research journals. I know Dad didn't die because she was obsessed with animals. I know he was helping her save endangered lions. Why did you lie to me?" His mother's voice became defensive. "We didn't lie, Marcus. We just simplified. You were so young when David died, and Dorothy was so devastated. She quit her job, sold our house, and moved to Montana with that lion." It seemed like she'd lost her mind. She was grieving. She chose that animal over her own family, over her career, over her own health. We tried to help her, but she pushed everyone away. All she cared about was Rex. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, because Rex was all she had left of Dad. He was Dad's project, too. She wasn't choosing the lion over family. She was trying to keep Dad's memory alive. Marcus, honey, you don't understand. No, Mom, you don't understand. Grandma didn't lose her mind when Dad died. She found a way to honor his life by continuing the work he believed in, and instead of supporting her, the family abandoned her. The next morning, Marcus returned to the hospital to find Dorothy sitting up in bed, looking more alert than she had in weeks, but her improvement was overshadowed by disturbing news from Helen Richardson. "Marcus, I'm glad you're here," Helen said, intercepting him in the hallway. "We need to discuss Dorothy's situation. Her condition is deteriorating rapidly, and I'm concerned about her mental state." "What do you mean?" Helen lowered her voice conspiratorially. "She's been talking about transferring her remaining assets to animal welfare organizations. Given her age and medical condition, I think we need to consider having her declared mentally incompetent to protect her interests." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "Protect whose interests, Helen? Hers or yours?" Helen's mask slipped slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm implying that you've been pressuring my grandmother to sell her property so you can profit from a development deal. And now that she's refused, you want to have her declared incompetent so you can control her assets." "That's a serious accusation, Marcus. I hope you have proof." "I'm a law student, Helen. I know how to research property records and development proposals. Sunset Manor Holdings, LLC has been quietly buying up land around my grandmother's ranch for the past 2 years. You need her property to complete your resort development." Helen's pleasant facade cracked completely. "Your grandmother is wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars on a wild animal while she could be ensuring proper care for herself and leaving something meaningful for her family. Someone needs to protect her from her own poor judgment." "Her judgment is fine. It's your ethics I'm questioning." That afternoon, Marcus sat with Dorothy and told her everything he'd discovered about her scientific reputation, about Helen's development scheme, about Rex's obvious grief and declining health. "Grandma, I owe you an apology. I spent years thinking you were wasting your money on a pet, but you were really continuing Dad's conservation work." Dorothy squeezed his hand weakly. "I don't blame you for being angry, honey. From the outside, it must have looked like foolishness, but it wasn't. Dad died trying to save animals, and you've spent 30 years honoring that sacrifice. Rex isn't just a lion you rescued. He's living proof that Dad's life meant something." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Your father would have been so proud of the man you've become, Marcus, and so proud that you finally understand." "I want to help, Grandma. I want to make sure Rex is taken care of after—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "After I'm gone?" Dorothy smiled sadly. "That's all I've ever wanted, sweetheart. Someone in the family who understands why this matters." But as they talked, neither of them noticed Helen Richardson standing just outside the door, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Dr. Morrison. I think we need to schedule that competency evaluation as soon as possible. The family is enabling her delusions about the animal, and her assets are at risk." The battle for Dorothy's legacy and Rex's life was about to begin. The competency hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving Marcus exactly 5 days to prepare for the legal fight of his life. Helen Richardson had moved quickly, filing papers with the county court claiming Dorothy was mentally compromised due to age-related cognitive decline and making irrational financial decisions regarding animal care. Marcus sat in his grandmother's hospital room, legal textbooks spread across the bedside table, while Dorothy rested fitfully. Her condition had worsened since the stress of the legal proceedings began, and Dr. Martinez had privately warned Marcus that the hearing itself might be too much for Dorothy's failing heart. "We need character witnesses," Marcus told Dorothy during one of her lucid moments. "People who can testify that you're mentally sound and have good reasons for your decisions." Dorothy nodded weakly. "Call Dr. Harrison at National Geographic and Jake at the sanctuary. They understand my work." "What about family? Mom and Dad might—" "No, honey." Dorothy's voice was firm despite her weakness. "Your parents made their feelings clear 30 years ago. They think I'm a crazy old woman who chose animals over people. Their testimony would hurt more than help." Marcus spent the next 3 days gathering evidence and witnesses. Dr. Harrison agreed to fly in from Washington, D.C. to testify about Dorothy's scientific credentials. Jake would speak about her ongoing care and attention to Rex's needs. But Marcus knew they needed something more compelling. Something that would prove Dorothy's relationship with Rex was based on legitimate research rather than delusion. The breakthrough came when Marcus was reviewing Dorothy's financial records with the hospital's social worker. Hidden among the monthly sanctuary payments, he found something unexpected: regular deposits to Dorothy's account from something called the International Lion Conservation Trust. "Grandma, what's the Conservation Trust?" Marcus asked. Dorothy's eyes brightened for the first time in days. "Royalties, sweetheart, from my research publications. The breeding protocols I developed are still being used by zoos and sanctuaries worldwide. Rex's behavioral data alone has generated over $200,000 in licensing fees over the past decade." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "You mean you've been earning money from your scientific work this whole time?" "I never stopped being a scientist, Marcus. I just stopped seeking fame for it. Every observation of Rex, every behavioral note, every health record, it's all valuable research data. I've been quietly publishing under a pseudonym for years." This changed everything. Dorothy wasn't just spending her life savings on a pet. She was funding ongoing scientific research that was actually generating income. Marcus immediately contacted a forensic accountant to analyze Dorothy's finances and prepare a report for the hearing. Meanwhile, Helen Richardson was building her own case. She'd hired Dr. Patricia Morrison, a psychiatrist who specialized in geriatric competency evaluations, to examine Dorothy. Dr. Morrison's preliminary report suggested that Dorothy showed signs of anthropomorphism and emotional transference, typical of elderly individuals with limited social contact. The hearing was held in Judge Catherine Walsh's chambers rather than open court, given Dorothy's medical condition. Dorothy sat in a wheelchair, oxygen tubes in her nose, flanked by Marcus and the court-appointed attorney he'd insisted on hiring despite their financial constraints. Helen Richardson sat with Dr. Morrison and a lawyer representing Sunset Manor Holdings, LLC. The proceeding felt more like a trial than a simple competency hearing. "Your Honor," Helen's attorney began, "we're here because Mrs. Thompson is making irrational financial decisions that threaten her ability to pay for her own medical care. She's spending $50,000 annually on the care of a single wild animal while living in a nursing home and facing mounting medical bills." Judge Walsh, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and graying hair, reviewed the files before her. "Mr. Thompson, your grandmother has indeed spent considerable sums on animal care. Can you explain the reasoning behind these expenditures?" Marcus stood, his law school training kicking in despite his nerves. "Your Honor, my grandmother isn't spending money irrationally. She's funding ongoing scientific research that generates income and contributes to global conservation efforts." He presented the forensic accountant's report, showing that Dorothy's research royalties had actually exceeded her sanctuary expenses by $30,000 the previous year. "Mrs. Thompson is a published scientist whose work continues to have value to the international conservation community. Dr. Harrison took the stand next, his distinguished appearance and obvious expertise lending weight to his testimony. Dorothy Thompson is one of the most brilliant animal behaviorists I've ever worked with. Her research on Rex represents the longest continuous study of human-lion bonding in scientific history. The data she's collected is irreplaceable. Dr. Harrison, Helen's lawyer, interjected, "Isn't it true that Mrs. Thompson has been living in a fantasy world, anthropomorphizing a dangerous wild animal?" "Absolutely not. Dorothy's observations are scientifically rigorous and emotionally detached. She documents Rex's behaviors, health changes, and responses to various stimuli with the precision of a trained researcher. Her work is cited in current conservation literature. But the most powerful moment came when Jake testified about Dorothy's daily involvement in Rex's care. "Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson calls every day at exactly 3 p.m. to check on Rex's condition. She asks specific questions about his appetite, his interaction with enrichment activities, his response to weather changes. She notices things that even our trained staff sometimes miss. Such as, last month Mrs. Thompson heard something different in Rex's breathing during our phone call. She insisted we have the veterinarian examine him. We found early signs of a respiratory infection that could have been serious if left untreated. Her knowledge of Rex's normal behavior patterns literally saved his life." Dr. Morrison then presented her evaluation, painting Dorothy as a confused, elderly woman projecting maternal feelings onto an animal. Mrs. Thompson consistently refers to Rex as her boy and believes the animal recognizes her voice over the phone. These are classic signs of anthropomorphic delusion common in isolated elderly individuals. But Marcus was ready for this attack. He pulled out his laptop and connected it to the courtroom's audio system. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording Jake made yesterday at my request." The recording began with Jake's voice. "Rex, come here, boy." There was no response from the lion. Then Jake tried different commands and calls, all met with silence. Finally, Jake played a recorded message from Dorothy. "Hello, my beautiful boy. Mama's thinking about you." The response was immediate and unmistakable. Rex's deep, rumbling vocalization, the same sound Marcus had heard during his visit. Rex responds to my grandmother's voice specifically, "Your Honor. This isn't delusion. It's documented interspecies communication." Judge Walsh listened to the recording twice before speaking. "Dr. Morrison, how do you explain this apparent recognition?" Dr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Animals can be trained to respond to specific audio cues, Your Honor. It doesn't indicate true emotional bonding or justify the financial expenditures." Marcus played his final card. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness via video conference." The screen filled with the image of Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of the Global Wildlife Conservation Initiative, calling from her office in Geneva. "Dr. Vasquez, can you explain the significance of Mrs. Thompson's research to the international conservation community?" Mrs. Thompson's work with Rex has been fundamental to our understanding of lion psychology and behavior. Her research protocols are used in breeding programs across 3 continents. Just last month, her behavioral modification techniques helped successfully integrate rescued lions in a South African sanctuary. And the financial value of this research? Immeasurable, really. But in concrete terms, licensing fees from Mrs. Thompson's protocols have generated over $500,000 for conservation programs worldwide. She's one of our most valuable research partners. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Dorothy wasn't a confused old woman wasting money on a pet. She was an active contributor to global conservation efforts. Judge Walsh called a brief recess, during which Helen Richardson's lawyer was seen whispering urgently with his client. When court reconvened, the tone had shifted dramatically. Your Honor, Helen's attorney said, in light of the evidence presented, Sunset Manor Holdings would like to withdraw our petition for conservatorship. We believe Mrs. Thompson is capable of making her own financial decisions. But Judge Walsh wasn't finished. Ms. Walsh Richardson, I'm concerned about the timing of this petition. It appears you filed for conservatorship shortly after Mrs. Thompson refused to sell property that your company needs for development. Can you explain this coincidence? Helen's face flushed red. Your Honor, we were genuinely concerned about Mrs. Thompson's welfare. I see. Well, I'm going to deny the petition and recommend that the State Attorney General's office review your nursing home's practices regarding elderly patients and property rights. As they left the courthouse, Dorothy squeezed Marcus's hand. Thank you, sweetheart. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that, Grandma? Hope that someone in the family finally understands what your father died trying to protect. But their victory was short-lived. That evening, Dr. Martinez called with devastating news. The stress of the hearing had triggered another cardiac episode. Dorothy had perhaps days, not weeks, left to live. And 2,000 miles away in Montana, Rex had stopped eating entirely. Dorothy's final hospitalization began on a Thursday evening when her heart simply couldn't keep fighting anymore. Marcus had been sleeping in the chair beside her bed for 3 nights, watching the monitors that tracked each labored breath, each irregular heartbeat. The doctors had done everything they could, but at 78, with a heart damaged by decades of grief and stress, Dorothy's body was ready to surrender. How long? Marcus asked Dr. Martinez during their morning rounds. Hours, maybe a day at most, she replied gently. Her heart is working at less than 15% capacity. We're keeping her comfortable, but there's nothing more we can do medically. Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He'd called the sanctuary that morning to check on Rex, and Jake's report had been devastating. The lion hadn't eaten in 4 days, hadn't responded to any of the keeper's attempts at interaction, and spent his time lying motionless in the far corner of his enclosure, staring toward the road that led to town. It's like he knows, Jake had said, his voice heavy with concern. I've never seen anything like it. He's mourning someone who's still alive. Dorothy stirred in her hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open. Even in her weakened state, she remained alert, her mind sharp despite her body's failure. Marcus, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. I need to ask you something important. Anything, Grandma. Rex is dying too, isn't he? I can feel it. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. He'd been trying to protect her from the worst news about Rex's condition, but Dorothy's connection to the lion transcended physical distance. Jake says he's struggling. He won't eat, won't respond to anyone. Dorothy closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her weathered cheek. I'm all he's known for 12 years. When I die, he'll have no reason to live. Don't talk like that. We'll figure something out. But Dorothy shook her head weakly. No, sweetheart. Rex and I have been connected since he was a baby. When one of us goes, the other will follow. That's what love does. It binds hearts together, even when it hurts. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the psychiatrist who had testified against Dorothy's competency, appeared in the doorway looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Mrs. Thompson, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you. Dorothy managed a weak smile. Of course, Dr. Morrison. Please sit down. Dr. Morrison pulled up a chair, her professional composure cracking slightly. I owe you an apology. After the hearing, I did some research into your scientific background. I had no idea of your credentials or the significance of your work. You were doing your job. No, I was making assumptions based on prejudice about elderly women and their relationships with animals. I've spent my career studying the human mind, but I've never encountered a bond like yours with Rex. It challenges everything I thought I knew about interspecies emotional connections." Dorothy's eyes brightened slightly. "Rex taught me that love doesn't require the same species, Dr. Morrison. It only requires the same heart." "I've been thinking about what you said during my evaluation, about Rex understanding loss and grief. I dismissed it as anthropomorphism, but there's substantial research supporting emotional complexity in large mammals. Rex lost his entire family as a baby. So did I, when David died. We recognized that pain in each other and found a way to heal together. Doctor." Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, would you mind if I documented your case? Not for legal purposes, but for research. The therapeutic value of human-animal bonding, especially in grief recovery, is an emerging field. Your relationship with Rex could help other people understand that healing comes in many forms." Dorothy nodded weakly. "As long as it helps people understand that love is love, regardless of who or what we love." That afternoon, Marcus received a call that changed everything. It was from Dr. Elena Vasquez in Geneva, the conservation director who had testified via video conference. "Marcus, I've been thinking about your grandmother's situation. We have a proposal that might interest you." "What kind of proposal?" "The Global Wildlife Conservation Initiative wants to establish a permanent research facility in Montana using Rex as the cornerstone of a long-term behavioral study. We're prepared to offer $2 million in funding for the facility plus ongoing operational support." Marcus nearly dropped the phone. $2 million? Your grandmother's research data alone is worth that much to the conservation community. But we'd need someone to oversee the program, someone who understands both the scientific value and the emotional significance of the work. "I'm a law student, Dr. Vasquez. I don't know anything about animal research." "You could learn, and you'd have access to the world's leading experts in the field. Think about it, Marcus. This would honor your grandmother's legacy while ensuring Rex receives care for the rest of his life." When Marcus shared the news with Dorothy, her response surprised him. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. But it's not enough." "Not enough?" "Grandma, it's $2 million and guaranteed care for Rex." Dorothy struggled to sit up higher in her bed. "Rex doesn't need just care, Marcus. He needs love. He needs someone who understands what he's been through, what he's lost. Money can't replace the bond we've shared." "But what choice do we have? You're—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. "Dying. Yes, I know." Dorothy's voice grew stronger, filled with the determination that had driven her through 30 years of scientific research. "But Rex doesn't have to die with me. Not if someone else can learn to love him the way I have." "How is that possible?" Dorothy reached for Marcus's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Because love isn't something you're born knowing, honey. It's something you learn by doing, by choosing to care even when it's difficult, even when it doesn't make sense to other people." "Are you asking me to—" "I'm asking you to consider it, not just funding Rex's care, but becoming part of his life, learning his moods, his needs, his language, becoming his family." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what she was suggesting. "Grandma, I don't know if I can be what Rex needs." "You don't have to decide right now, sweetheart. But think about this. Your father died trying to save animals like Rex. I've spent 30 years continuing that work. Maybe it's time for the next generation to carry it forward." That evening, as Dorothy slept fitfully, Marcus found himself calling Jake at the sanctuary. "How is he tonight?" Jake's voice was grim. "Worse. He's not even lifting his head when we bring food. The vet is coming tomorrow, but honestly, Marcus, I think he's just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "To join Dorothy. I've seen it before with bonded animals. When one dies, the other often follows within days or weeks. Marcus stared out the hospital window at the Montana landscape, thinking about his grandmother's request. Could he really take on the responsibility of caring for a grieving lion? Could he learn to love an animal the way Dorothy had? Jake, what would it take for Rex to accept someone new in his life? I don't know if that's possible at his age. He's known Dorothy since he was a baby. She's literally the only human he's ever fully trusted. But hypothetically, if someone were willing to spend time with him, to learn his routines, to try to build a relationship, it would take months, maybe years, and there's no guarantee it would work. Lions don't usually transfer their affections to new people, especially not animals as traumatized as Rex was. But it's possible? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Your grandmother always said Rex was special, more emotionally intelligent than any lion she'd ever worked with. If anyone could learn to love again after losing Dorothy, it might be him, but it would require someone with incredible patience and dedication. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that Dorothy had been preparing him for this moment his entire life. Every story about David's compassion, every explanation of Rex's background, every gentle correction of his assumptions about the value of animal life, it had all been leading to this choice. He looked at his sleeping grandmother, machines keeping her fragile body alive, and made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. "Okay, Grandma," he whispered. "I'll try. For you, for Dad, and for Rex. I'll try to learn how to love the way you do." Dorothy Mae Thompson died on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m., just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the Montana mountains. Marcus was holding her hand when her heart monitor flatlined, and in that moment of profound silence, he felt something shift in the universe. A connection severing, a love story ending after 30 years of devotion. The nurses moved efficiently around the room, turning off machines and removing tubes, but Marcus couldn't move. He sat frozen in the bedside chair, still gripping his grandmother's cooling hand, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. Dorothy was gone, and with her, decades of scientific knowledge, maternal wisdom, and the fierce love that had sustained a lion through years of captivity. Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, her expression gentle but professional. "Marcus, I'm so sorry for your loss. Dorothy was an extraordinary woman." "She was," Marcus managed to whisper, finally releasing his grandmother's hand. "What happens now?" "We'll need to contact the funeral home, handle the paperwork, but there's no rush. Take whatever time you need." As the medical staff completed their procedures, Marcus found himself thinking not about funeral arrangements or legal documents, but about Rex. Somewhere in Montana, a lion was about to discover that his entire world had collapsed. Marcus called Jake at 4:15 a.m., knowing the keeper often started work early. "Marcus, is everything—" Jake's voice immediately shifted when he heard the silence. "Oh, God. When?" "About 30 minutes ago. Peaceful, in her sleep." There was a long pause before Jake spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Rex is going to know. They always know." "How?" "I can't explain it scientifically, but I've seen it before with bonded animals. They sense when their person is gone, even from a distance. Rex has been restless all night, pacing and calling out. I think he felt her leaving." Marcus closed his eyes, imagining the magnificent lion alone in his enclosure, waiting for a phone call that would never come. "Jake, I need to ask you something. Do you think Rex could ever accept someone else? Could he learn to trust another person?" "Dorothy asked you to try, didn't she?" "Yes, and I told her I would. But now that she's actually gone, I don't know if I'm strong enough." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, I've worked with animals for 20 years, and I've never seen a bond like Dorothy and Rex had. What they shared was extraordinary, maybe once in a lifetime. But Rex is still alive, and he still has the capacity to love. Whether he'll choose to love again, that's up to him. And if he doesn't? If he just gives up? Then we'll have tried? And that's all Dorothy ever asked of anyone, to try. The funeral arrangements took 3 days to organize. Dorothy had been specific in her will about wanting a simple ceremony at the Montana Veterans Cemetery, where her husband was buried. She'd also left detailed instructions about Rex's care during the transition period, including a request that Marcus spend time at the sanctuary before making any permanent decisions about the lion's future. On Thursday morning, Marcus drove to Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary for the second time in his life. The landscape looked different now, more desolate, more challenging. He was no longer a skeptical law student visiting to argue about money. He was a grieving grandson trying to honor a promise that might be impossible to keep. Jake met him at the gate, his weathered face showing the strain of the past few days. "How are you holding up?" "I honestly don't know. This whole situation feels surreal. Rex hasn't eaten since Tuesday morning. We've tried everything. Different foods, changing his routine, even playing recordings of Dorothy's voice. Nothing works." They walked through the sanctuary grounds toward Rex's enclosure. Marcus could hear other animals, wolves howling, eagles calling, bears rustling through their habitats. But from Rex's area came only silence. The lion was lying in the far corner of his enclosure, his massive frame somehow diminished by grief. His golden coat had lost its luster, and his eyes stared vacantly toward the road that led to town. When he saw Marcus approaching, Rex lifted his head slightly but showed no other sign of recognition or interest. "Rex," Marcus called softly, feeling foolish but remembering Dorothy's instructions about always speaking to the lion directly. "I'm Dorothy's grandson, Marcus. I know you remember me." The lion's ears twitched at the sound of Dorothy's name, but he didn't move. Jake opened the outer gate of the enclosure, leading Marcus into the safety corridor that separated visitors from the animals. Dorothy used to sit here for hours, just talking to him. She said lions are good listeners. Marcus pulled up a folding chair and sat down, feeling awkward and uncertain. "What did you say to a grieving lion? How did you comfort an animal who had lost the only family he'd ever known?" "Rex, I know you miss her. I miss her too." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Dorothy told me about how she found you as a baby, how scared and hurt you were. She said you taught her that love doesn't require the same species." Rex's eyes shifted toward Marcus for the first time, and for a moment there was a flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. "She also told me about my father, David. How he died trying to save animals like you." I never understood why that mattered so much to her, why she spent her life caring for creatures that most people would consider dangerous. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out something he'd brought from Dorothy's room, a worn leather journal that contained her earliest observations of Rex's behavior. He opened it to a random page and began reading aloud. Day 127. Rex responded positively to classical music today, specifically Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21. His stress indicators decreased significantly during the Andante movement. Note: investigate correlation between musical therapy and emotional healing in traumatized animals. Rex lifted his head higher, his eyes now fully focused on Marcus. The lion made a soft sound, not quite a growl, but not silence either. "She documented everything about you, Rex. Every breakthrough, every setback, every moment of progress. You weren't just her research subject, you were her life's work." Marcus spent the next hour reading from Dorothy's journals, sharing observations and memories that painted a picture of Rex's remarkable intelligence and emotional depth. Gradually, the lion moved closer to the fence until he was lying just a few feet away from where Marcus sat. The thing is, Rex, I don't know how to be what Dorothy was to you. I'm not a scientist. I don't understand animal behavior, and I'm terrified of making mistakes that could hurt you. Rex made that soft vocalization again, and Marcus remembered Dorothy explaining that it meant family. But Dorothy asked me to try, and I promised her I would. Not because I think I can replace her. No one could do that. But because maybe, if we're both patient enough, we can figure out a new way to be family. Jake had been watching from a distance, but now he approached with obvious amazement. Marcus, Rex hasn't moved from that corner in 3 days. The fact that he came over to listen to you, that's significant. What does it mean? It means he recognizes something in you. Maybe it's your voice. Maybe it's Dorothy's scent on her journals. Maybe it's something deeper. But he's showing interest for the first time since she died. That evening, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of driving back to his apartment in Missoula, he asked Jake if he could sleep in the sanctuary's guest cabin. Dorothy used to stay here sometimes when Rex was sick or stressed, Jake explained, showing Marcus to a small but comfortable room overlooking the lion's enclosure. She said she slept better knowing he was nearby. Marcus spent his first night as Rex's potential guardian lying awake, listening to the sounds of the sanctuary, wind through pine trees, distant animal calls, and occasionally Rex's low vocalizations. It was a language Marcus didn't understand yet, but one he was determined to learn. The next morning, he woke to find Rex sitting near the fence closest to the cabin, staring directly at the window. When Marcus emerged with his coffee and Dorothy's journals, the lion remained in position, as if he'd been waiting. "Good morning, Rex," Marcus said, settling into his chair. "Dorothy wrote that you're always more alert in the mornings. She called you a dawn lion, someone who greets each new day with hope." Rex tilted his massive head, and for the first time since Dorothy's death, his tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but a sign of engagement. Marcus opened the journal to another passage and began reading about the day Dorothy first heard Rex purr, a sound that, according to her notes, lasted for 3 full minutes and represented a breakthrough in their emotional connection. She wrote that your purr was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, because it meant you finally felt safe enough to be vulnerable with another being. As if summoned by the memory, Rex made a deep rumbling sound in his chest, not quite a purr, but close enough to make Marcus's heart skip. "We're going to figure this out together, aren't we, boy? It might take time, and it won't be the same as what you had with Dorothy, but maybe we can create something new, something that honors her memory while helping both of us heal." Rex's response was to lie down in the morning sun, his great head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. It was the beginning of a new kind of love story, different from what came before, but no less powerful for its uncertainty. 3 months after Dorothy's funeral, Marcus had established a routine that would have seemed impossible to him just a year earlier. Every morning at dawn, he drove from his small apartment in Missoula to Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary, where Rex waited by the fence with what Jake called anticipatory behavior, a sign that the lion had begun to trust that Marcus would return each day. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. For the first month, Rex had shown interest but remained distant, accepting Marcus's presence without truly engaging. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered Dorothy's old cassette tapes, recordings she'd made of herself reading scientific papers and personal observations during Rex's early years at the sanctuary. She used to play these when Rex was anxious or sick, Jake had explained, showing Marcus the ancient tape player Dorothy kept in her desk. Her voice was like medicine to him. Marcus had started playing the tapes during his visits, and the effect on Rex was remarkable. The lion's stress indicators, pacing, restlessness, loss of appetite, decreased significantly whenever Dorothy's recorded voice filled the enclosure. But more importantly, Rex began associating Marcus with the comfort those recordings provided. The real turning point came on a particularly difficult day in February. Marcus had arrived at the sanctuary to find Rex in obvious distress, pacing frantically and calling out with what Jake recognized as separation anxiety vocalizations. "It's the anniversary," Jake had said quietly. "February 15th. That's the day Dorothy first brought him here as a cub. He always gets agitated around this date." Instead of playing Dorothy's recordings, Marcus had made an impulsive decision. He sat beside Rex's enclosure and began talking about his own grief, his own struggle to understand the magnitude of love Dorothy had shown the lion. "I know you miss her, Rex. I miss her too, in ways I'm just beginning to understand. For 30 years you were the most important thing in her life, not because you were a scientific subject or a research project, but because you were her heart walking around outside her body." Rex had stopped pacing and moved closer to the fence, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that was both humbling and encouraging. "The thing is, I'm learning that love isn't something you replace. It's something you build on. Dorothy's love for you doesn't disappear just because she's gone. It becomes the foundation for whatever comes next." That was the day Rex first made physical contact with Marcus, pressing his massive head against the fence where Marcus's hand rested. The gesture was brief but profound, an acknowledgement that perhaps this young man could be trusted with the memory of his beloved human. Now, in May, their relationship had evolved into something neither Marcus nor the sanctuary staff had thought possible. Rex ate regularly when Marcus was present, engaged with enrichment activities, and had even begun playing again, batting at hanging toys and rolling in the grass like a much younger lion. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived from Geneva on a warm Tuesday morning to evaluate the conservation initiative's progress. Marcus was nervous about the visit, knowing that the future of both the sanctuary and Rex depended on her assessment. "I have to admit, I'm astonished," Dr. Vasquez said after observing Marcus and Rex interact for several hours. "When Dorothy died, I assumed we'd lost not only a brilliant researcher but also our primary research subject. The emotional trauma typically prevents animals from bonding with new humans." "Rex is extraordinary," Marcus replied, watching the lion sunbathe near the fence. "Dorothy always said he had an unusual capacity for emotional intelligence. And you've managed to tap into that intelligence. The behavioral data you've been collecting is remarkable. It shows Rex not just surviving Dorothy's loss, but actually thriving in a new relationship dynamic." Marcus had indeed continued Dorothy's research, though he'd initially been reluctant to see Rex as a subject rather than simply an animal to care for. But as their bond deepened, he'd come to understand that documenting Rex's emotional journey was itself an act of love, a way of honoring Dorothy's scientific legacy while contributing to understanding of interspecies relationships. "Dr. Vasquez, I need to ask you something," Marcus said as they walked toward the sanctuary office. "Rex is 12 years old now. How much time do we realistically have left with him? In captivity, with excellent care, some lions live to 15 or 16. Rex could have several good years ahead of him, especially given his improved emotional state. And after? What happens to the research program when Rex is gone?" Dr. Vasquez smiled. "That's actually why I'm here. We want to expand the program, Marcus. Your success with Rex has convinced the board that human-animal bonding research could revolutionize animal care in captivity. We're prepared to offer you a full position as research coordinator with a salary that would allow you to continue this work as your career." Marcus felt his heart skip. "You're offering me a job? We're offering you the chance to turn Dorothy's life work into your own. The facility expansion would include housing for other rescued big cats, primates, even elephants. You'd be building something unprecedented. a research center dedicated to understanding and facilitating emotional healing in traumatized animals. The implications were staggering. Marcus could abandon law school, abandon his previous plans for a conventional career, and instead dedicate his life to continuing the work that had cost his father his life and consumed his grandmother's heart. That evening, Marcus sat with Rex as the sun set behind the Montana mountains, contemplating the decision before him. The lion rested peacefully nearby, occasionally making soft vocalizations that Marcus had learned to interpret as contentment. "What do you think, Rex? Should we build something bigger? Create a place where other animals like you can find healing?" Rex's response was to move closer and rest his massive head near Marcus's feet, a gesture of trust that still amazed everyone who witnessed it. Jake approached from the main building, carrying Dorothy's final research journal. "I found something you should see," he said, handing Marcus the leather-bound book. The journal was dated just weeks before Dorothy's death, and the final entry was addressed not to the scientific community, but to Marcus himself. "My dear Marcus," Dorothy had written in her careful script, "if you're reading this, it means you've chosen to honor the promise you made to me about Rex. More importantly, it means Rex has chosen to trust you with his heart. I know this path isn't what you planned for your life. Law school seemed like a practical choice, a way to build security and success. But I've watched you with Rex these past weeks, and I see something in you that reminds me of your father. A capacity for love that transcends self-interest." David died trying to save animals he'd never met in a country far from home because he understood that some things are worth any sacrifice. You've already made your own sacrifice by choosing to stay with Rex instead of pursuing your original plans. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't really a sacrifice at all. It's a calling. The work you're doing with Rex, the bond you're building, the research you're contributing, it's changing how the world understands the emotional lives of animals. You're not just caring for one lion. You're pioneering a new approach to animal welfare that could help thousands of creatures worldwide. I've arranged with Dr. Vasquez to ensure funding for whatever path you choose. If you decide to continue this work, you'll have everything you need to build something extraordinary. If you choose to return to law school, Rex will be cared for, and there will be no judgment from me. But I hope you'll choose love over convention, purpose over profit, healing over habit. I hope you'll see that sometimes the most important inheritance isn't money or property, it's the chance to continue a story that began with your father's compassion and has been sustained by 3 decades of devotion to a remarkable animal. Rex has taught me that love doesn't end when life does. It transforms, it adapts, it finds new ways to express itself. What you and Rex are building together isn't a replacement for what he had with me. It's a continuation of the same story, written in a new voice but with the same fundamental message, that love, real love, transcends every boundary we think exists. Choose love, Marcus. Choose the extraordinary over the ordinary. Choose to be part of something bigger than yourself. With all my love and faith in your future, Grandma Dorothy. P.S. Rex's favorite song is still Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21. Play it for him when you need to remind him and yourself that beauty exists even in sorrow. Marcus closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. Rex, sensing his emotion, moved closer and made that soft rumbling sound that Dorothy had always interpreted as, "I love you." Looking at the lion who had changed his life, Marcus made his choice. Marcus stood before the board of the Global Wildlife Conservation Initiative 6 months later, no longer the uncertain law student who had once seen Rex as an expensive burden. He was now the director of the Dorothy Thompson Center for Interspecies Healing, a groundbreaking facility that had already welcomed its first group of rescued animals: 3 elderly lions from a defunct circus, 2 orphaned bear cubs, and a traumatized elephant named Luna, who had been saved from an abusive traveling show. "The results speak for themselves," Marcus told the assembled board members, his confidence evident as he presented the data that had transformed not just his life, but the entire field of animal psychology. "Rex's integration with the new arrivals has been remarkable. Rather than becoming territorial or aggressive, he's actually taken on a mentoring role, helping traumatized animals adjust to sanctuary life." Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly from her seat at the conference table. "Marcus, your grandmother would be incredibly proud. The research you've generated in just 6 months has already influenced policy changes in zoos and sanctuaries across 4 continents. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't in the data or the international recognition. It was in Rex himself. The aging lion, who many had expected to decline rapidly after Dorothy's death, had instead found new purpose. He'd become the emotional anchor for every animal that arrived at the sanctuary, offering comfort and stability to creatures who had experienced trauma similar to his own. Marcus often marveled at this development during his morning visits with Rex. The lion, who had once been defined by loss, had become a teacher of resilience, showing other animals that it was possible to love again after devastating grief. "Good morning, old friend," Marcus said as he approached Rex's expanded enclosure, now part of a multi-acre habitat that housed the center's growing population of rescued big cats. Rex emerged from the shade of an old oak tree, his movement slower than it had been a year ago, but his eyes still bright with intelligence and affection. At 13 years old, Rex was now considered ancient by lion standards. His mane had developed streaks of silver, and he moved with the careful dignity of an elder who had seen much of life. But his bond with Marcus had only grown stronger, evolving into something that amazed even the world's leading experts on animal behavior. "The new cubs arrived today," Marcus told Rex as he settled into his usual spot by the fence. "2 little ones from that terrible situation in Texas. They're going to need someone to show them that humans can be trusted again." Rex made his familiar rumbling sound. The vocalization that Marcus had learned meant, "I understand," and moved closer to the fence. Over the months, their communication had become almost telepathic, a silent language of gestures, sounds, and shared understanding that reminded Marcus daily of the extraordinary bond his grandmother had described. Jake approached from the main building, carrying a folder of veterinary reports and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had witnessed something remarkable. "Rex's blood work came back from the lab," Jake announced. "Dr. Peterson says he's in better health than some lions half his age. His stress hormones are at the lowest levels we've ever recorded." Marcus smiled, knowing the reason behind Rex's improved health. The lion had found his purpose again, not just as a beloved companion, but as a healer of other wounded souls. Every traumatized animal that came to the sanctuary benefited from Rex's calming presence, his intuitive understanding of pain and recovery. "There's something else," Jake continued, his voice taking on a tone of excitement. "The National Geographic crew called. They want to do a feature story on the center, focusing on Rex's role in animal therapy. It could bring international attention to our work." Marcus considered this development carefully. Fame had never been his goal, and he was protective of Rex's privacy and dignity. But if sharing their story could help other animals receive better care, if it could change how the world viewed the emotional lives of captive wildlife, then perhaps the exposure would be worthwhile. "What do you think, Rex?" Marcus asked, knowing the lion couldn't understand the complexities of media attention, but trusting that their connection would guide him to the right decision. "Should we tell the world about what you and Grandma Dorothy started?" Rex's response was to stand and walk to the center of his habitat, where a large bronze plaque had been installed 6 months earlier. The plaque bore Dorothy's photograph and the inscription, "Dr. Dorothy Mae Thompson, scientist, mother, pioneer. Love transcends every boundary we think exists." Every day, Rex would spend time near this memorial, and Marcus had come to understand that this ritual wasn't about mourning, it was about remembering. Rex was honoring Dorothy's memory while embracing his new role as a teacher and healer. That afternoon, the two orphaned cubs arrived from Texas. Siblings named Hope and Courage by the rescue organization that had saved them from a roadside attraction where they'd been neglected and abused. They were barely 6 months old, frightened, malnourished, and deeply traumatized by their early experiences with humans. Marcus watched from the observation deck as the cubs were introduced to their temporary quarantine habitat, adjacent to but separated from Rex's enclosure. The little ones huddled together in the far corner, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Rex observed the new arrivals with the patient wisdom of someone who understood exactly what they were experiencing. He positioned himself near the shared fence line and began making soft, reassuring vocalizations, the same sounds Dorothy had once used to comfort him during his own darkest moments. "He's telling them they're safe now," Marcus murmured to Jake, who was documenting the introduction for the veterinary records. Over the following days, Marcus witnessed something that never failed to amaze him: Rex's natural ability to heal through presence and patience. The old lion would lie near the fence for hours, allowing the cubs to gradually approach and find comfort in his calm energy. He showed them how to play, how to explore their environment, and most importantly, how to trust again. Dr. Sarah Martinez, who had become a regular consultant at the center, was documenting Rex's therapeutic interactions for a research paper on animal-assisted healing. "Marcus, what Rex is doing naturally, this intuitive understanding of trauma and recovery, it's revolutionizing how we think about animal psychology," she told him during one of her visits. "He's essentially practicing a form of therapy that we're only beginning to understand scientifically." "Dorothy always said he was special," Marcus replied, watching Rex gently guide one of the cubs toward an enrichment toy. "She believes some animals are born with an extraordinary capacity for empathy." She was right. And somehow, Rex has channeled his own healing journey into a mission to help others. It's remarkable. As autumn approached, Marcus faced a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Harvard Law School had offered him a deferred admission with a full scholarship, an opportunity that represented everything he'd once thought he wanted from life: security, prestige, financial success, a conventional path that his parents would understand and approve. But sitting with Rex in the golden light of a Montana sunset, Marcus realized he'd already found his calling. The center was expanding again, with plans for a veterinary college partnership that would train the next generation of animal behaviorists. Rex would become the cornerstone of a program that could change animal welfare practices worldwide. "I think I know what Dorothy meant about choosing love over convention," Marcus told Rex as they shared their evening routine. "This work we're doing, it's not just about caring for animals. It's about proving that healing is possible, that love really can transcend any boundary." Rex's response was to rest his massive head against the fence where Marcus sat, a gesture that had become their ritual of connection. In that moment, Marcus understood that he'd inherited more than his grandmother's research or her financial support. He'd inherited her calling, her purpose, and her unshakable belief that love was the most powerful force in the universe. The center now bore a new motto, carved into the entrance gate: "Where broken hearts learn to love again." It was a promise that honored Dorothy's legacy while pointing toward a future where Marcus, Rex, and countless other animals would continue the work of healing, one wounded soul at a time. As the stars emerged over the Montana mountains, Marcus made his final decision about Harvard, about his future, and about the extraordinary life that choosing love had given him. Message for American seniors, 200 words. Sometimes life's most beautiful chapters begin when we think our story is over. Dorothy Thompson spent 30 years believing she'd lost everything, her career, her son, her purpose. But in choosing to love a traumatized lion, she discovered that healing often comes disguised as an impossible responsibility. Marcus thought he wanted conventional success until he learned that true wealth lies in connections that transcend logic, in love that doesn't calculate costs, in purpose that emerges from the very pain we think will destroy us. Their story reminds us that it's never too late to choose meaning over money, compassion over comfort. Whether you're facing retirement, loss, or simply wondering if your best years are behind you, remember, every wounded creature, human or animal, carries the capacity to heal others through their own journey of recovery. Love doesn't diminish with age, it deepens. Purpose doesn't fade, it evolves. And sometimes the most extraordinary legacy isn't what we leave behind, but what we choose to nurture in the time we have left. Questions for engagement. What unexpected relationship in your life taught you the most about love? Have you ever found purpose in something others couldn't understand? Share your story in the comments below.